"Ma'am, you need to move to economy immediately. This seat isn't for people like you." Flight attendant Cassandra Blake's voice sliced through first class like a blade, her platinum blonde hair perfectly styled in a sleek bob that caught the cabin's overhead lights. Her red lipstick gleamed as she smiled with false sweetness, her fitted navy blazer hugging her curves in all the right places. Diamond earrings sparkled as she tilted her head, looking down at the black woman in casual clothes with the kind of condescending expression that suggested she'd had this conversation many times before. The woman in seat 1A didn't flinch. She sat perfectly still in her oversized gray hoodie and black leggings, her messy bun held in place with what looked like a simple hair tie. To everyone watching, she appeared to be just another passenger trying to fly above her station. But appearances, as they say, can be deceiving. What Cassandra Blake didn't know was that in exactly 14 minutes, the woman she was trying to humiliate would shut down their entire airline and destroy every career in that cabin. The elegant flight attendant, with her designer uniform modifications and cold blue eyes, was about to learn that some passengers carry more authority than others, and some mistakes cost more than a simple apology. Before we dive into this story of sky-high justice that will leave you questioning everything you think you know about power and prejudice, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your city below in the comments. And if you believe everyone deserves respect at 30,000 feet, regardless of what they're wearing or what they look like, hit that subscribe button and ring that notification bell. Trust me, you don't want to miss what happens next. Because tonight on Apex Airlines Flight 892 from Chicago, O'Hare to Washington, D.C., karma isn't just coming. It's arriving with federal authority and a badge that's about to turn this stormy Tuesday evening into the most expensive lesson in respect that corporate America has ever received. The rain hammered against the terminal windows like thousands of angry fists, and inside the cabin of Flight 892 tension was building like the storm clouds gathering outside. But this wasn't about weather delays or turbulence. This was about something much more dangerous, the collision between prejudice and power, between assumptions and authority, between what people think they see and what's actually sitting right in front of them. Dr. Zara Williams adjusted her reading glasses and pulled her hoodie a little tighter around her shoulders. She'd chosen her outfit carefully tonight, every piece designed to test exactly what was about to unfold. The premium leather sneakers on her feet cost more than most people's monthly salary, but they looked like any other black shoes. The messy bun was held with a vintage sterling silver pin, worth more than Cassandra's monthly commission, but it looked casual and thrown together. And the mind behind those tortoiseshell glasses, it held a Ph.D. in aviation safety engineering and a level 6 security clearance with the Department of Transportation. But to the trained eye of prejudice, she just looked like someone who didn't belong. Cassandra stepped closer, her heels clicking on the cabin floor with the kind of authority she thought she possessed. "I said you need to move. First class requires a certain standard." Dr. Williams looked up calmly. Her voice was quiet, measured, but something in her tone made even the passengers 3 rows back pay attention. "I am in seat 1A. And I will remain in seat 1A. The cabin fell silent. Even the storm outside seemed to pause. "Continue with your current course of action," Dr. Williams said, her fingers never stopping their quiet typing on what looked like a simple tablet, and you'll discover exactly why that's a problem for you. Cassandra's perfectly manicured eyebrows drew together in confusion. This wasn't how these conversations usually went. Passengers who didn't belong typically got flustered, apologetic, or angry. They didn't issue calm warnings with the confidence of someone who knew something she didn't. But Cassandra Blake had built her career on maintaining control of her cabin. She wasn't about to let one passenger, regardless of how strangely self-assured she seemed, disrupt the natural order of things. After all, she could see exactly who belonged in first class and who didn't. And the woman in the hoodie definitely didn't belong. What she couldn't see was the storm that was about to hit. Because sometimes the most powerful people in the room are the ones everyone underestimates, and sometimes those people are taking very careful notes. 3 hours earlier, Dr. Zara Williams had stood in her downtown Chicago apartment, deliberately choosing the most unassuming outfit in her wardrobe. The irony wasn't lost on her. She was about to board a plane wearing clothes that cost less than $200 to test a system that generated billions in annual revenue. But this wasn't about fashion. This was about justice. At 32, Zara held one of the most important positions. Most people had never heard of: senior field auditor for the Federal Aviation Administration. Her Ph.D. in aviation safety engineering made her one of the youngest people ever to reach her level of clearance, but it was her personal motivation that made her one of the most effective. 2 years ago, her younger sister Keisha had been humiliated on a flight from Atlanta to Chicago. Keisha, a medical resident fresh from her residency, had saved up for months to buy a business class seat for her mother's birthday surprise. She'd dressed professionally: slacks, blazer, conservative jewelry. But the moment she'd boarded, the flight attendants had questioned her seat assignment. They'd verified her boarding pass 3 times. They'd suggested she might be more comfortable in economy. They'd made her feel like a criminal for having the audacity to pay for premium service while being black. Keisha had endured the 2-hour flight in tears, surrounded by passengers who either pretended not to notice or actively agreed with the crew's assessment. When she'd filed a complaint, the airline had offered her a travel voucher and a form letter about their commitment to diversity. That night, sitting in her sister's apartment as Keisha sobbed over wine and takeout, Zara had made a decision. She was going to use her position to fight back, not just with reports and recommendations, but with real documented evidence that could shut down airlines that thought discrimination was acceptable business practice. Since then, she'd completed undercover audits on 7 major airlines. Tonight's mission on Apex Airlines was number 8, and if her intelligence was correct, it might be the most important one yet. For 6 months, Apex Airlines had been flagged in federal databases for safety violations and discrimination complaints. Anonymous reports had flooded social media about flight crews who treated passengers differently based on race, ethnicity, and perceived economic status. Pilots allegedly ignored safety protocols when VYP passengers demanded special treatment. Corporate culture, according to internal whistleblowers, prioritized profit and elite passenger comfort over federal regulations and basic human dignity. Zara's job was to experience it firsthand and document everything for the federal case that was already being built in Washington. She'd flown on her personal credit card to be reimbursed later and used her own upgrade points to secure seat 1A. To anyone checking, she was just Dr. Z. Williams, a graduate student flying home for the holidays. The encrypted tablet in her carry-on was disguised to look like any consumer device, but it was directly linked to secure FAA servers. Every keystroke, every observation, every piece of evidence was being uploaded in real time to federal databases that would soon become the foundation of criminal charges. As she'd walked through O'Hare's Terminal 3 toward Gate B7, the storm outside had matched her mood perfectly. The rain pounded the floor-to-ceiling windows like nature itself was angry about what was about to unfold. Tuesday evening flights were always stressful. Business travelers rushing to get home, delayed connections, tired crew members working their 3rd sector of the day. Perfect conditions to see who people really were when they thought nobody important was watching. The gate area for Flight 892 was crowded with the usual mix of business travelers and leisure passengers. Zara had observed the gate agent Miguel Rodriguez, a 45-year-old Hispanic man who looked tired but professional. He'd handled passenger questions with patience, even when people were frustrated about delays. That was important to note. Ground staff behavior often reflected corporate culture, and Miguel seemed like someone who genuinely cared about doing his job well. If the flight crew behaved differently than ground staff, it would suggest training problems or management priorities that valued appearance over service. When boarding began, Miguel had announced it clearly: Group 1 First Class and active military may now board. His voice carried respect for military passengers that suggested personal experience or family connections. Another positive sign. Zara had approached the gate with her boarding pass already loaded on her phone. The scanner beeped green, and Miguel had said, "Have a nice flight," without looking up, already focused on the next passenger. Normal, professional, no issues. It was only when she'd walked down the jet bridge and entered the aircraft that the atmosphere had changed immediately. The air inside was cool and smelled of recycled oxygen and fresh coffee. Standing at the galley entrance was the lead flight attendant, her name tag reading Cassandra Blake. And that's when Zara had known her intelligence was correct. Cassandra had the kind of smile that didn't reach her eyes, a practiced, tight expression that said, "I am tolerating you rather than welcome aboard." She'd been adjusting a stack of napkins with unnecessary precision, her blonde hair styled into a helmet of perfection that probably took 45 minutes every morning. But it was the way Cassandra's eyes had immediately assessed Zara's appearance, taking in the hoodie, the leggings, the sneakers, the messy bun that confirmed this audit was necessary. The evaluation had taken less than a second, and the verdict was clear in Cassandra's expression before she'd even spoken. Doubt, dismissal, the kind of prejudgment that federal law explicitly prohibited in interstate commerce. "Welcome aboard," Cassandra had said, her tone bright but dismissive. She'd barely glanced at Zara's face. "Economy is down the aisle to your right. Find a space for your bag quickly. We're fully booked." And that's when Zara had known she was about to document exactly the kind of behavior that would shut down an airline. "Actually, I'm in 1A, she'd said calmly. Cassandra had stopped shuffling the napkins. The smile had disappeared entirely as she'd looked up, her eyes raking over Zara's outfit again, with undisguised skepticism. The assessment was so obvious, so blatant, that passengers in nearby seats had started to notice. "Can I see your boarding pass, please?" The word "please" had been sharp like a weapon, and that's when Zara had known that tonight was going to be exactly as bad as her intelligence had suggested. Maybe worse. Zara held up her phone with the boarding pass displayed clearly on the screen. The bright display showed her name seat assignment, 1A, and the unmistakable first-class designation that airlines made impossible to fake or mistake. Cassandra squinted at the screen without touching it, as if the digital pixels might somehow contaminate her perfectly manicured fingers. She read the name Dr. Z. Williams, the seat number, and the status designation. There was absolutely no denying it. Seat 1A, first class, fully paid and confirmed. "Right," Cassandra said, her voice dropping an octave and losing all pretense of customer service warmth. "First-class wardrobe closet is full. You'll have to put your bag above row 4. The dismissive tone wasn't lost on anyone within earshot. 3 passengers in the first few rows had already turned to watch the interaction, sensing something uncomfortable developing. "That's fine," Zara said softly, maintaining her calm demeanor as she moved past Cassandra. She could feel the flight attendant's eyes boring into her back like laser beams, could practically hear the mental calculations being made about whether this passenger truly belonged in the premium cabin. As Zara settled into the plush leather seat of 1A, she began her quiet observations of the cabin layout and passenger dynamics. The first-class section was only partially full, always a good sign for documenting discriminatory behavior, since staff couldn't claim they were simply overwhelmed. Seat 1B directly next to her was empty, and would presumably remain so unless a last-minute passenger appeared. Across the aisle in 2A sat an elderly woman who was already asleep, her gray hair perfectly styled and a Chanel handbag tucked securely under the seat in front of her, the kind of passenger who never got questioned about belonging in first class. In row 2B was Amanda Torres, a 26-year-old Hispanic woman with warm brown eyes and an intelligent face. She was scrolling through her phone, occasionally glancing up at the other passengers. Zara noticed she'd been watching the interaction with Cassandra with obvious discomfort. Row 3A held Robert Fisher, a 54-year-old white man with the straight posture and alert eyes of someone with military background. He'd looked up from his newspaper when Cassandra's voice had turned cold, and his expression suggested he'd recognized unprofessional behavior when he saw it. Behind him in 4B sat Maria Santos, a 38-year-old Hispanic business executive juggling phone calls and laptop work with the efficiency of someone who traveled frequently for work. She'd paused her typing when the interaction began and was now openly staring at Cassandra with disapproval. In row 5 was Jennifer Walsh, a 31-year-old white woman who kept checking her phone anxiously, probably a nervous flyer dealing with pre-flight jitters. But even her anxiety couldn't mask her shock at what she'd just witnessed. Zara pulled out her encrypted tablet disguised in a plain black case that looked like any consumer device. To anyone watching, she appeared to be checking emails or reading. In reality, she was documenting evidence that would soon become part of a federal case. Observation 1, she typed quietly. Lead flight attendant displayed explicit bias upon boarding. Directed passenger to economy despite valid first-class boarding pass. Dismissive tone and body language suggest pattern of discriminatory behavior. Checked ticket only after passenger corrected assumption about seat assignment. The government-issued device automatically time-stamped every entry and uploaded to secure servers in real time. Even if something happened to the tablet, every piece of evidence was already preserved in federal databases. She was still typing when Amanda Torres leaned slightly across the aisle. "Excuse me," Amanda said quietly, her voice carrying just enough volume for Zara to hear without drawing attention from the crew. "Are you okay?" "That was really inappropriate." Zara looked up and smiled. "Thank you for noticing. I'm fine." "I'm Amanda," the younger woman said, extending her hand across the narrow aisle. "Travel blogger." "And what just happened?" "That's exactly why I document my flights." She held up her phone discreetly. "I hope you don't mind, but I started recording when her voice changed. People need to see how some airlines still treat passengers." "I don't mind at all," Zara replied. "Documentation is important." Robert Fisher folded his newspaper and leaned forward. "Ma'am, 30 years in the Air Force taught me what professional service looks like. What just happened, wasn't it?" His voice carried the quiet authority of someone accustomed to command. "If you need a witness statement, you've got one." Maria Santos looked up from her laptop. "Make that 2 witnesses. I travel 50 weeks a year for business, and that flight attendant's behavior was completely unacceptable." She gestured toward Cassandra, who was now chatting animatedly with someone at the galley. "Look at how different her demeanor is with other passengers." Indeed, Cassandra was practically glowing as she spoke with a well-dressed white businessman who'd just boarded. Her voice carried clearly across the cabin, warm, welcoming, professional. The contrast couldn't have been more obvious. Jennifer Walsh, despite her obvious nervousness about flying, couldn't stay silent. "I'm sorry, but I have to say something. I saw the whole thing, and it was really uncomfortable to watch." She held up her phone. "I recorded it too, just automatically. When people are being treated unfairly, I guess I just react." Zara felt a familiar satisfaction. One of the challenges of undercover auditing was ensuring adequate witness documentation. Tonight, it seemed passengers were doing half her job for her. Amanda was already uploading her video to TikTok with hashtags that would soon trend globally. Apex Airlines discrimination, first-class fail passenger rights. "This is going live," she announced quietly. 23 followers turned into 47 people watching in real time. Small audience, but growing. "Good," said Maria, snapping photos of Cassandra's name tag and the Apex Airlines logo above the galley. "Accountability starts with documentation." Robert was texting someone on his phone. "Sending this to my daughter. She's a civil rights attorney in D.C. Said she wants to see the video when we land." The cabin was filling up now as economy passengers found their seats, but the first-class section remained relatively empty. Perfect conditions for observing how crew members treated the few premium passengers differently based on their assumptions about who belonged. Zara continued typing her observations. Multiple passengers independently documenting discriminatory treatment. Witness statements available. Contrast in FA behavior with different passengers clearly visible and recorded. The plane's engines hummed to life, and the usual pre-flight announcements began. But Cassandra's voice over the intercom carried none of the warmth she'd shown to other passengers. When she demonstrated safety procedures, her eyes swept over the cabin but never lingered on seat 1A. Observation 2. Flight attendant avoiding eye contact with targeted passenger during safety demonstration. Continuing pattern of differentiated service based on racial bias. Amanda leaned over again. My follower count just jumped to 96 people watching the stream. They're asking for updates. She paused, then added, I'm happy to keep documenting if it helps. It helps, Zara confirmed. What none of them knew was that the real drama was about to begin, because Flight 892 was about to welcome its most demanding passenger, a man whose sense of entitlement would push the situation from uncomfortable to explosive. And when that happened, Zara would be ready with documentation that would destroy careers and change an industry. The cabin shook slightly from heavy footsteps as someone boarded the aircraft. But this wasn't just walking, this was arriving. The man who entered first class carried himself like he owned not just the plane but the entire airline. Harrison Blackwood stood 6 feet 2 inches tall in a perfectly tailored Navy suit that probably cost more than most people's cars. His silver hair was slicked back with the kind of precision that required a personal barber, and his face had the red puffy look of someone who enjoyed expensive scotch with the frequency most people drank water. But it was his voice that announced his presence before anyone even saw him. He was talking loudly on his phone, the kind of conversation designed to impress anyone within earshot. I don't care what the SEC says. Jerry. His voice boomed across the cabin like he was addressing a conference room instead of a confined aircraft. Tell them to shove their subpoena where the sun doesn't shine. I'm Harrison Blackwood, for God's sake. They wouldn't dare actually prosecute me. Zara stiffened in her seat. She knew that name. Harrison Blackwood, CEO of Blackwood Industries, a logistics empire built on aggressive hostile takeovers and a corporate culture that treated employees like disposable assets. She'd read about him in business journals not for his success, but for his legendary cruelty to service staff and anyone he considered beneath his social status. The man was a walking liability, the kind of passenger who turned minor inconveniences into federal incidents, and judging by his volume and content of his phone call tonight, was already not going well for him. Listen, Jerry, the government thinks they can intimidate me with paperwork and investigations. Harrison's laugh was harsh and dismissive. I've been dodging congressional hearings longer than some of these prosecutors have been alive. Now book me that meeting with Senator Morrison and make sure his chief of staff knows I'm not happy about this SEC fishing expedition. He ended the call with enough force to make passengers 3 rows back wince, then stood in the aisle surveying the first-class cabin like a conquering general reviewing his territory. Harrison looked at seat 1B directly next to Zara. Then he looked at his boarding pass. Then he looked at Zara herself, and his expression immediately shifted from general irritation to specific offense. It wasn't confusion. It wasn't uncertainty. It was the look of a man who believed the world should arrange itself according to his preferences, and something was clearly out of place. He turned to Cassandra, who had materialized at his elbow like a genie responding to a very wealthy wish. Her transformation was instantaneous and dramatic. Gone was the cold, dismissive flight attendant who had questioned Zara's right to be in first class. In her place stood a woman practically vibrating with excitement to serve Mr. Blackwood. Cassandra chirped, her voice now syrupy sweet with the kind of reverence usually reserved for royalty or major donors. Welcome back to Apex Airlines. We have your usual Macallan 25 ready to serve once we reach cruising altitude. The contrast was so stark that Amanda Torres actually gasped audibly, her phone still recording. Maria Santos had stopped pretending to work on her laptop and was now openly staring at the spectacle unfolding. "Cassandra, good to see you," Harrison grunted, though his tone suggested it was anything but good to see anyone. He pointed a thick manicured finger at seat 1B. "Why is my seat blocked on the app? I thought this was reserved." "Oh, it's actually open, Mr. Blackwood. Did you want to switch from 1B? Cassandra's voice had reached a pitch that was almost musical in its eagerness to please. Harrison looked at his boarding pass again, as if it had personally insulted him. "My assistant always books 1A for me. I need the leg room and I don't want neighbors." He glanced at Zara with the kind of dismissive assessment usually reserved for furniture that had been placed incorrectly. He didn't look at her as a person. He looked through her as if she were an obstacle to be removed rather than a fellow passenger with equal rights. "I'm not sitting there," Harrison announced loudly enough for the entire first-class cabin to hear. His voice carried the expectation of immediate compliance that came from decades of people rearranging their lives around his comfort. "Is there a problem?" Mr. Blackwood Cassandra asked, leaning in conspiratorially as if they were discussing state secrets rather than seat assignments. Harrison waved his hand vaguely in Zara's direction without actually acknowledging her existence as a human being. "I'm not sitting next to that. I need space to work on confidential business matters." And frankly, the dress code standards in first class seemed to have deteriorated significantly. His pause before the word that was deliberate and designed to dehumanize. This wasn't accidental prejudice or unconscious bias. This was intentional discrimination delivered with the confidence of someone who had never faced consequences for his behavior. "Are we letting standby passengers squat in first class? Now?" Harrison continued, his voice growing louder and more entitled. "People like her should understand there are standards to maintain. I pay premium prices for premium service, not to sit next to charity cases who don't understand appropriate travel attire." The cabin fell completely silent. Even the elderly woman in 2A had woken up and was staring in shock at the blatant display of prejudice unfolding in front of her. Zara didn't look up from her tablet. Her heart rate remained perfectly steady. She'd dealt with cartel money laundering operations and terrorist financing networks. An entitled CEO having a public meltdown was practically a relaxing afternoon by comparison. She typed calmly, "Observation 3. Platinum passenger H. Blackwood, making explicitly discriminatory statements about adjacent passenger based on race and perceived socioeconomic status. Flight crew accommodating discriminatory requests. Multiple witnesses recording incident." Amanda's live stream had jumped from 96 viewers to 234 people watching in real time. Comments were flooding in faster than she could read them, but the tone was universally outraged. "I understand completely," Mr. Blackwood Cassandra whispered, though her whisper was loud enough for the first 4 rows to hear clearly. "Let me see what I can arrange for you. Why don't you take 1A for now and I'll move this passenger somewhere more appropriate?" Harrison smiled for the first time since boarding. Perfect. I knew I could count on professional service. But what neither Harrison nor Cassandra realized was that they had just committed federal crimes, and the woman they were discussing was taking very detailed notes about every single word. Harrison Blackwood slammed his leather briefcase into the overhead bin above row 1, with the kind of force that suggested he was used to making noise until people paid attention to him. The bin was already marked with a full placard, but that apparently didn't apply to passengers of his status. "Good," he declared loudly, settling his considerable bulk into seat 1A with a grunt of satisfaction. "Now we can get this flight moving." Cassandra turned her attention to Zara with the expression of someone who had just been given a distasteful but necessary task. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to collect your belongings and move to an available economy seat." "I'm sorry," Zara said calmly, not looking up from her tablet. "There seems to be some confusion." I purchased Seat 1A and I'll be remaining in Seat 1A. The response was so matter-of-fact, so utterly devoid of the flustered compliance Cassandra expected, that she actually blinked in surprise. This wasn't how these situations usually played out. Passengers who didn't belong in first class typically became defensive apologetic or angry when confronted. They didn't issue calm corrections with the confidence of someone who knew exactly where they stood. Sir Cassandra said, turning back to Harrison, "This passenger is refusing to cooperate with our seat management protocols." Harrison looked up from his phone with the expression of a man unused to being inconvenienced by lesser mortals. "Then call security. People like her need to learn their place, and apparently they won't learn it voluntarily." Amanda Torres had heard enough. She stood up in her seat, her phone still recording, and addressed Cassandra directly. "Excuse me, but are you seriously trying to remove a passenger from a seat she paid for just because this man doesn't like sitting next to her?" "Miss, please remain seated," Cassandra said sharply. "This doesn't concern you." "Actually, it concerns all of us," Robert Fisher interjected from row 3A. His military bearing was evident as he stood up to his full height. "What you're doing right now violates federal passenger protection laws. I've seen discrimination in my time, and this is textbook." Maria Santos closed her laptop with a definitive snap. "I'm a corporate compliance officer," she announced clearly. "What I'm witnessing right now is a civil rights violation in real time. Multiple civil rights violations, actually." Jennifer Walsh, despite her obvious nervousness, couldn't stay silent. "This is really wrong. Like really, really wrong. People are going to see this video and they're going to be disgusted." Harrison's face was turning an increasingly dangerous shade of red. "Are we seriously going to delay this entire flight because one passenger can't accept that she doesn't belong in first class? This is ridiculous. She belongs exactly where she's sitting," Amanda said firmly. "Her live stream viewer count now approaching 500. She has a valid boarding pass. She paid for her seat, and she's done nothing wrong except exist while black." The directness of Amanda's statement hit the cabin like a thunderclap. There it was, the truth everyone could see, but nobody had said out loud until now. Cassandra's face flushed. "That is completely inappropriate and inaccurate. This is about seat management and passenger comfort, not about what you're suggesting." "Then why," Robert asked with military precision, "didn't you question the elderly woman's seat assignment when she boarded? Why didn't you suggest she might be more comfortable elsewhere? What exactly makes this passenger different from any other first-class passenger?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Cassandra opened her mouth, closed it, then opened it again without producing any sound. Even she seemed to realize that any answer would only dig the hole deeper. Harrison, however, had no such concerns about subtlety. "The difference is obvious," he declared. "Look at her. Look at how she's dressed. This is first class, not a bus station. Some people understand how to present themselves appropriately, and others clearly don't." "My clothing," Zara said quietly, speaking for the first time since the confrontation began, "violates no airline policy. My boarding pass is valid. My payment was processed correctly. I have broken no Federal Aviation regulations." She looked up from her tablet directly at Harrison. "Can you say the same?" Something in her tone made Harrison pause. There was an authority in her voice that hadn't been there before, a confidence that suggested she knew more about Federal Aviation regulations than the average passenger should. "Are you threatening me?" Harrison demanded. "I'm observing," Zara replied evenly. "And I'm documenting." Observation 4. She typed on her tablet. "Passenger H. Blackwood escalating discriminatory behavior with explicit references to racial and class-based prejudice. Flight crew continuing to accommodate illegal requests. Multiple passengers providing witness testimony in real time. Amanda's live stream had exploded to over 800 viewers. Comments were pouring in so fast they were impossible to read, but she caught fragments. Call the FB. This is insane. Someone needs to stop this. Get their names. My followers want your name, Amanda told Zara, so people can support you when this goes viral. That's very kind, Zara replied, but documentation is support enough. Maria was furiously typing on her phone. I'm uploading this to LinkedIn with every civil rights hashtag I can think of. My network includes DOT compliance officers who need to see this. Harrison stood up abruptly, his considerable frame casting a shadow over Zara's seat. Enough. I want this passenger removed immediately, or I'm filing complaints with corporate headquarters, the FAA, and my personal attorney. Do you understand who you're dealing with? Do you? Zara asked quietly. The question was simple, but something about the way she asked it made everyone in the cabin stop talking. Even Harrison seemed momentarily unsettled by the calm certainty in her voice. Cassandra, sensing the situation spiraling beyond her control, pressed the call button for the flight deck. Captain Morrison, could you please come to first class? We have a situation that requires your attention. Within moments, Captain David Morrison emerged from the cockpit. He was a 49-year-old white man with the weathered look of someone who'd spent decades in commercial aviation. His uniform was crisp, his bearing professional, but his eyes showed the fatigue of someone working his third sector of a very long day. What seems to be the problem? He asked, surveying the scene. Harrison standing angrily over Zara's seat, Cassandra looking flustered, and half the first-class cabin holding up phones. Captain Harrison boomed, I'm Harrison Blackwood of Blackwood Industries. We have significant contracts with several airlines, including partnerships with Apex. This passenger is disrupting the cabin and refusing to follow crew instructions. Captain Morrison looked at Zara, who was sitting quietly in her seat tablet in her lap, showing no signs of disruption beyond her mere existence. Ma'am, is there some problem with your seat assignment? No problem at all, Captain Zara replied calmly. I'm in my assigned seat with a valid boarding pass. I haven't violated any regulations or caused any disturbance. Then what exactly the captain began? The problem, Harrison interrupted, is that this passenger doesn't understand appropriate behavior for first class. Look at her. Look at how she's dressed. This reflects poorly on your airline standards. Captain Morrison's expression grew uncomfortable. He was being asked to make a decision that had nothing to do with safety or regulations, and everything to do with prejudice and privilege. And unfortunately for everyone involved, he was about to make the wrong choice. Captain Morrison rubbed his forehead with the weary gesture of someone who had dealt with difficult passengers too many times to count. But what he was facing now wasn't a standard customer service issue. It was a test of federal aviation law, and he was about to fail it spectacularly. Ma'am, he said to Zara, in the interest of getting this flight airborne on time, would you be willing to accept an upgrade to business class on our next available flight? We can provide meal vouchers and hotel accommodation if necessary. The offer revealed everything wrong with Apex Airlines' approach to passenger disputes. Captain Morrison was essentially trying to bribe away a civil rights violation instead of addressing it. Captain Robert Fisher interjected respectfully, she's already in the seat she paid for. Why would she need to move to accommodate someone else's prejudice? Amanda's live-stream chat was exploding with legal commentary from viewers. That's illegal. Captain is violating federal law. Call the FBI. Her viewer count had jumped to 1,247 people watching live. This isn't about prejudice, Captain Morrison said, though his discomfort was obvious. This is about passenger comfort and operational efficiency. Whose comfort, Maria Santos demanded. The passenger who's sitting quietly in her assigned seat, or the passenger who's making discriminatory demands and disrupting the entire cabin? Cassandra stepped forward with a tablet of her own. Captain, I've reviewed our Diamond Elite protocols. Mr. Blackwood has platinum status with over 2 million miles flown. Our policy is to prioritize elite passenger comfort in situations like this. Situations like what exactly, Amanda asked, still filming. What situation has this woman created other than existing while black? But Cassandra had revealed something crucial. Apex Airlines had a corporate policy that prioritized elite passenger comfort over federal passenger protection laws. They'd institutionalized discrimination by calling it customer service. Zara continued typing on her tablet. Observation 5. Captain Morrison, attempting to remove passenger without cause to accommodate discriminatory demands. Flight crew citing Diamond Elite protocols that appear to violate federal anti-discrimination laws. Evidence of corporate policy supporting biased treatment. Miguel Rodriguez's voice crackled over the intercom from the gate. Flight 892, we have weather concerns developing. We need to close the door and push back immediately or face extended delays. The pressure to resolve the situation quickly was mounting, and Captain Morrison was making increasingly poor decisions. I understand everyone's concerns, he announced to the cabin, but we have operational requirements that take priority. Ma'am, he addressed Zara directly. I'm asking you to voluntarily relocate to ensure we can depart on schedule, Captain Zara said calmly. Are you ordering me to leave my paid seat to accommodate another passenger's discriminatory demands? The question was precisely worded and designed to force him into an official position. If he said yes, he was violating federal law. If he said no, Harrison would escalate the situation further. Captain Morrison chose the wrong option. Yes, he said. As captain of this aircraft, I'm instructing you to relocate for operational reasons. The cabin erupted. Amanda's live stream viewers jumped to over 2,000 as word spread across social media. Robert was shaking his head in disgust. Maria was typing furiously on multiple devices. Jennifer had started crying partly from flight anxiety, partly from witnessing injustice in real time. But Zara remained completely calm. Observation 6. Captain Morrison issuing unlawful order to remove passenger based on racial discrimination. Direct violation of federal passenger protection statutes. Multiple witnesses documenting federal crime in progress. Captain, she said quietly, I suggest you reconsider that order very carefully. There may be consequences you haven't anticipated. Harrison, emboldened by the captain's support, stood up to his full height. Finally, someone with authority who understands appropriate standards. Now can we get this resolved? What none of them realized was that Miguel Rodriguez had been listening to the entire exchange through the aircraft's communication system. As a gate agent with 15 years of experience, he knew federal passenger protection laws better than most flight crews, and what he was hearing was making him physically ill. Miguel picked up his radio and called his supervisor. This is Gate B7. We have a federal passenger rights violation developing on Flight 892. I need immediate guidance on company protocols. His supervisor, Linda Park, was in her office reviewing delay reports when the call came in. What kind of violation, Miguel Captain, is ordering a passenger to leave her paid seat because another passenger complained about her race? It's all being live-streamed. We're looking at a viral discrimination incident if this isn't stopped immediately. Linda's blood went cold. She'd been through the corporate training sessions about viral incidents. The airline industry lived in terror of social media disasters, and this sounded like it could destroy the company. Patch me through to the aircraft immediately, she ordered. Meanwhile, on the plane, Cassandra was radioing ground operations. Gate agents, please prepare alternative seat assignments for passenger relocation. Miguel's voice came back immediately. Negative Flight 892. We cannot support passenger relocation based on discriminatory complaints. This is Linda Park, Operations Supervisor. Captain Morrison, you need to return to the flight deck immediately. Captain Morrison's face went pale. His supervisor getting involved meant the situation had escalated beyond his authority to handle. Harrison was furious. What is going on here? I demand to speak to someone in charge who understands customer service. You're about to, Zara said quietly. And that's when Amanda's live stream reached 3,000 viewers. Robert's civil rights attorney daughter joined the stream to provide legal commentary, and Maria's LinkedIn post went viral in the business compliance community. The storm outside was nothing compared to the hurricane of accountability that was about to hit Apex Airlines Flight 892. Harrison Blackwood had built his fortune by escalating conflicts until everyone else backed down. When reason failed, he used volume. When volume failed, he used legal threats. When legal threats failed, he used character assassination. Tonight he was about to try all three at once. "This is absolutely ridiculous," he announced to the entire cabin, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "I've flown first class for 20 years, and I've never seen such unprofessional behavior from airline staff. But his target wasn't the crew, it was Zara. "Lady," he said, pointing directly at her. "I don't know how you got that boarding pass, but I guarantee it wasn't through legitimate channels. People in your situation don't just randomly have access to first-class seats." The accusation hung in the air like poison gas. Harrison was essentially claiming that Zara had somehow stolen or fraudulently obtained her seat assignment. Amanda's live stream chat exploded with outrage. Viewer count jumped to 4,891 as people shared the stream across every social platform. "He's accusing her of theft. This is insane. Someone call the police. Mr. Blackwood Robert Fisher said his military training keeping his voice level despite his obvious anger. "You need to stop talking immediately. You're making accusations you can't prove about crimes that didn't happen." "Can't I?" Harrison shot back. "Look at her clothes. Look at her presentation. Does this look like someone who can afford first-class tickets?" "I'm telling you something fraudulent is happening here." Maria Santos was recording every word. "Sir, you're making racist assumptions about someone's economic status based on their appearance. You're also accusing her of criminal activity with no evidence. That's defamation." But Harrison was past caring about legal niceties. "I want her boarding pass verified immediately. I want her credit card checked. I want proof that she didn't steal someone else's confirmation or use some kind of fraudulent payment method." Cassandra, sensing an opportunity to support her most valuable passenger, stepped forward with renewed confidence. "That's actually not an unreasonable request. We do have verification protocols for suspicious transactions. Suspicious based on what criteria Amanda demanded, still streaming to nearly 5,000 viewers. Unusual travel patterns, inconsistent, passenger presentation, potential fraud indicators." Cassandra recited as if reading from a manual. "You mean traveling while Black Robert said," flatly. Zara had remained silent throughout the exchange, continuing to type on her tablet with the same calm precision she'd maintained since boarding. But now she looked up directly at Harrison. "Mr. Blackwood," she said, her voice carrying a quiet authority that made everyone in the cabin pay attention, "you've just accused me of theft, fraud, and criminal activity. You've made these accusations publicly in front of witnesses while being recorded for broadcast." "Damn right I have," Harrison replied. "And I stand by every word." "I want that on the record," Zara said. "Please repeat your accusation clearly for the cameras." Something about her request should have warned Harrison that he was walking into a trap, but his arrogance overwhelmed his common sense. "Fine," he declared loudly, turning to face Amanda's camera directly. "I believe this passenger obtained her first-class seat through fraudulent means. I believe she either stole someone else's confirmation, used a stolen credit card, or manipulated the booking system. People like her don't belong in first class, and they certainly can't afford it legitimately." The cabin fell into stunned silence. Even Cassandra looked uncomfortable with the directness of Harrison's accusations. Observation 7. Zara typed, "H. Blackwood making public accusations of criminal fraud based solely on racial prejudice. Defamatory statements made intentionally in front of witnesses and recording devices. Additional federal charges applicable." Captain Morrison's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've been cleared for departure. Flight attendants, please prepare for pushback." But Harrison wasn't finished. "Captain, I demand you verify this passenger's ticket before we leave the gate. I'm not flying with someone who's committed fraud to get aboard this aircraft," Sir Zara said calmly. Would you like me to provide additional verification of my seat assignment? Absolutely, Harrison declared. Full verification. Credit card, ID, confirmation numbers, everything. Very well. Zara reached into her carry-on bag. What she pulled out wasn't a credit card or additional identification. It was a second device, one that looked very different from her consumer tablet. The device was clearly government-issued matte black, reinforced edges, multiple antenna ports, and a screen that displayed official federal database access portals. Amanda's camera captured it immediately. Her viewer count jumped past 6,000 as people began sharing screenshots of the mysterious device. "Oh my God," Amanda whispered, still streaming. "Viewers, she just pulled out some kind of official government device. This is getting really intense." Miguel Rodriguez's voice crackled over the radio. "Flight 892. We have a situation developing at the gate. Please hold your position pending further instructions." Harrison stared at the device in Zara's hands. For the first time since boarding, he looked uncertain. "What the hell is that?" "This," Zara said calmly, "is verification of my identity and authority." She paused, then looked directly into Amanda's camera. "And it's about to change everything you think you know about this situation." Captain Morrison's voice came over the intercom again, but this time he sounded stressed. "Folks, we're going to have a brief delay while ground operations addresses some administrative issues. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened." Cassandra was staring at the device in Zara's hands with growing alarm. "Ma'am, passengers aren't allowed to operate unauthorized electronic devices during—" "This device," Zara interrupted, "is fully authorized for use in commercial aircraft. It's also connected to databases that are about to become very relevant to this conversation." Harrison's face was cycling through confusion, anger, and something that might have been the first glimmer of concern. "I don't care what kind of device you have. Fraud is fraud." "You're absolutely right," Zara agreed. "Fraud is fraud. And fortunately, we're about to have a very detailed discussion about exactly what fraud looks like." The storm outside was intensifying, but it was nothing compared to the storm that was about to hit inside the cabin of Flight 892. Zara opened the government device with a quiet beep that somehow commanded the attention of everyone in the first-class cabin. The screen that lit up was unlike anything passengers would normally see: multiple database access portals, encrypted communication channels, and what appeared to be real-time federal oversight systems. Amanda's live stream had reached 8,457 viewers, and the chat was moving so fast with speculation and legal commentary that she could barely keep up. Screenshots of the device were already spreading across Twitter, Reddit, and TikTok, with hashtags like Government Device Federal Agent Apex Exposed. Ma'am, Cassandra said nervously, "Passengers aren't authorized to operate federal equipment on commercial aircraft without proper clearance," Zara finished calmly. "You're absolutely correct." She looked up from the device. "Fortunately, I have that clearance." Harrison was staring at the screen, trying to read the text from his seat. "What kind of clearance? What are you claiming to be?" "I'm not claiming anything, Mr. Blackwood. I'm documenting everything." Robert Fisher leaned forward in his seat. "Ma'am, 30 years in the Air Force taught me to recognize official federal equipment. That device, that's not something civilians carry. You're very observant, Mr. Fisher." Maria Santos had stopped pretending to work and was openly photographing everything. "The serial numbers visible on that device, I've seen similar equipment in DOT compliance audits, federal oversight systems." Jennifer Walsh was live streaming to her own social media accounts now. Despite her flight anxiety, she couldn't look away from what was unfolding. "Guys, I think we're about to witness something historic." Zara's fingers moved across the device with practiced efficiency. To the passengers watching, she appeared to be accessing multiple databases simultaneously, running queries, pulling records, cross-referencing information with the speed of someone who used these systems regularly. Database query, Harrison Blackwood. Dot compliance records. Database query, Apex Airlines. Federal violations, log. Database query, Flight 892. Passenger manifest. Verification. Database query. Crew certification. Status. Morrison. David database. Query crew certification status. Blake Cassandra. The searches were happening in real time, and every result was being uploaded to secure federal servers as evidence. "What are you doing?" Harrison demanded, his voice carrying less authority than before. "I'm running background checks," Zara replied matter-of-factly. "You've accused me of criminal activity, so I thought I'd verify everyone's legal standing." Amanda's chat exploded. "She's running background checks. Federal database access. This woman is government." Captain Morrison's voice came over the intercom, clearly agitated. "Flight attendants, please report to the flight deck immediately." But Cassandra couldn't move. She was transfixed by the information appearing on Zara's screen federal databases that civilian passengers should never have access to. Mr. Blackwood, Zara said conversationally, "According to federal records, your company is currently under investigation by the Securities and Exchange Commission for fraudulent accounting practices. There are also 3 pending DOT violations related to hazardous materials transportation violations." Harrison's face went white. "How did you... That information isn't public." "No, it isn't," Zara agreed. "This level of access is restricted to federal oversight personnel." She paused, which raises an interesting question about who you think you're dealing with. The cabin fell silent except for the sound of rain hitting the windows and the quiet hum of the aircraft's systems. Robert was staring at Zara with growing realization. "Ma'am, are you law enforcement?" "I'm a federal auditor, Mr. Fisher." The words hit the cabin like a physical blow. Amanda gasped audibly on her live stream. Maria dropped her phone. Jennifer's eyes went wide with shock. But Harrison wasn't ready to accept what he was hearing. "That's impossible. Federal auditors don't fly in hoodies. They don't travel incognito. You're bluffing." "Mr. Blackwood, would you like me to verify my credentials?" "Yes, I absolutely would. Prove it." Zara reached into her carry-on bag again. This time she pulled out a leather credential case, the kind that only federal law enforcement and oversight personnel carried. She opened it slowly, deliberately holding it so Amanda's camera could capture it clearly. The gold badge inside read, "Dr. Zara Williams, Senior Field Auditor, Federal Aviation Administration, Department of Transportation." The live stream chat went completely insane. Viewer count jumped to over 12,000 as word spread across every social platform. Federal Auditor began trending nationally within minutes. "Oh my God," Amanda whispered, still streaming. "Still. Viewers, she's a federal auditor. She's actual government authority. This entire incident has been a federal investigation." Cassandra's hands were visibly shaking. "Ma'am, Dr. Williams, I had no idea if we had known. If you had known," Zara said calmly, "would you have treated me differently?" The question hung in the air like an indictment. Because federal law requires that you treat all passengers equally, regardless of whether they're government officials or private citizens. Discriminatory service based on appearance, race, or perceived economic status violates federal regulations, regardless of who's experiencing it. Harrison was staring at the badge in complete shock. There's been some kind of misunderstanding." "Has there?" Zara asked. "Let's review the record." She turned her device so the cabin could see the screen. It displayed a real-time transcript of every conversation that had taken place since boarding. "At 7:43 p.m., you stated, and I quote, 'People like her should understand there are standards.' At 7:44 p.m., Are we letting charity cases squat in first class? At 7:52 p.m., you accused me of theft and fraud based solely on my appearance. Every word was time-stamped and recorded in federal databases. All of this, Zara continued, was said about a federal auditor conducting an official investigation into Apex Airlines' compliance with passenger protection laws. Miguel Rodriguez's voice came over the intercom. Flight 892, this is operations. We need all crew members to report to the gate immediately. Do not proceed with departure. Captain Morrison appeared from the flight deck, his face pale. Dr. Williams, if you are who you say you are, this situation has escalated far beyond my authority. It has indeed, Captain. Harrison was still trying to process what had happened. Wait, you mean this entire thing was some kind of setup, some kind of sting operation? No, Mr. Blackwood. This was simply a federal auditor trying to fly home from a work assignment. You chose to turn it into a federal investigation. Amanda's live stream had reached 15,000 viewers and was still climbing. News outlets were starting to pick up the story. Apex Airlines was trending globally, and in federal buildings across Washington, D.C., phones were starting to ring. The medium twist was complete. But the real revelation was still coming. The atmosphere inside Flight 892 had transformed completely. What had begun as a routine evening departure was now a federal incident with thousands of people watching live and news outlets scrambling to cover the story. Captain Morrison stood at the front of first class looking like a man who had just realized his career was over. Dr. Williams, I need to understand the scope of what's happening here. Are you conducting an official federal investigation of this flight? I was conducting a routine audit, Zara replied calmly. It has now become something much more significant. Harrison Blackwood was slumped in seat 1. No longer the commanding presence who had boarded 30 minutes earlier. The realization that he had spent the last half hour publicly discriminating against a federal auditor was slowly sinking in. This is entrapment, he said weakly. You were dressed like you deliberately misled us about who you were. Mr. Blackwood Robert Fisher interjected federal agents don't have to announce themselves to prevent you from breaking the law. And what you did would have been illegal regardless of who she was. Amanda's live stream had become the primary source of information for news outlets around the country. CNN, MSNBC, and Fox News were all monitoring her feed as the story exploded across social media. Viewers, Amanda said into her camera, we're now at 18,000 people watching live. This has become one of the biggest airline discrimination stories in recent history, and it's happening in real time. Maria Santos was coordinating with her corporate compliance network, providing real-time legal commentary to business leaders across multiple industries. This isn't just about one airline she was posting on LinkedIn. This is about corporate culture that enables discrimination at the highest levels. Cassandra Blake had retreated to the galley where she was frantically trying to contact corporate headquarters. But every call was going to voicemail. The company's crisis management team was probably in emergency session, trying to figure out how to handle a viral federal investigation. Miguel Rodriguez appeared at the aircraft door with Linda Park, the operations supervisor, and 2 additional men in suits who were clearly not airline employees. Dr. Williams, one of the men called out. I'm Special Agent Martinez with the FBI. We need to speak with you immediately. The cabin erupted in whispers. FBI agents boarding a commercial aircraft was unprecedented in most passengers' experience. Harrison's phone was ringing constantly. His board of directors, his legal team, and reporters who had gotten hold of his contact information were all trying to reach him. But he wasn't answering any calls. He was staring at the floor, apparently trying to calculate how many federal crimes he had committed in the last hour. Agent Martinez Zara replied, I'm in the middle of documenting evidence for a federal civil rights violation. Are you here to assist with the investigation? Ma'am, We're here because this incident has been flagged at the highest levels of federal law enforcement. When a senior FAA auditor reports civil rights violations involving commercial aviation, we respond immediately. The second agent, a woman with FBI credentials, began photographing the cabin configuration and taking statements from witnesses. Robert, Maria, Amanda, and Jennifer were all eager to provide detailed accounts of everything they had witnessed. Captain Morrison was trying to manage an increasingly impossible situation. Dr. Williams, what do you need from my crew to resolve this matter? Captain, your crew has violated multiple federal regulations. This aircraft is now a crime scene, and I need everyone to remain exactly where they are while federal agents collect evidence. Cassandra reappeared from the galley, her professional demeanor completely shattered. Dr. Williams, please understand we follow company protocols. We had no way of knowing— Ms. Blake, you had every way of knowing that discriminating against passengers based on race is illegal. Federal law doesn't make exceptions for company protocols. Harrison finally looked up from his phone. Look, everyone, this has gotten completely out of hand. I was just expressing frustration about delays and service standards. I never intended— Mr. Blackwood, Agent Martinez interrupted. You're under arrest for interference with a federal investigation, civil rights violations, and assault on a federal officer. Assault. Harrison's voice cracked. I never touched anyone. You physically intimidated a federal auditor and made threats about having her forcibly removed from the aircraft. That constitutes assault under federal law. The reality of federal charges was finally penetrating Harrison's arrogance. I want my attorney. I want my attorney right now. You'll have the opportunity to contact legal counsel once you're processed. Agent Martinez replied, producing handcuffs. Amanda's live stream viewer count had passed 25,000. The story was trending on every social media platform, and amateur legal experts in the chat were providing real-time analysis of the federal crimes they were witnessing. Viewers, they're actually arresting him, Amanda narrated. This is unprecedented. I've never seen anything like this happen on a commercial flight. The elderly woman in seat 2A, who had slept through the initial confrontation, was now wide awake and watching in fascination as FBI agents documented evidence around her. Jennifer Walsh was crying again, but this time from relief rather than anxiety. I've never seen justice happen this fast, she told her own live stream audience. Usually when people are racist, nothing happens. Tonight, federal agents are literally arresting someone for discrimination. Maria Santos was documenting everything for her corporate compliance reports. This is what accountability looks like, she posted on multiple platforms. When federal oversight actually has teeth, this is the result. But the biggest shock was still coming. Dr. Zara Williams opened her government device one more time and began typing a message that would be transmitted directly to FAA headquarters, the Department of Justice, and Congressional Oversight Committees. Federal Incident Report. Priority: Alpha Subject, Apex Airlines. Flight 892. Multiple federal violations. Recommend immediate fleet grounding. Pending investigation evidence includes civil rights violations, safety protocol, breaches, corporate policy, enabling discrimination. Witness testimony secured, viral documentation confirmed. As she hit send, phones began ringing in federal buildings across Washington, D.C., and within the hour, Apex Airlines would face the most serious crisis in its corporate history. The pressure cooker was about to explode. Dr. Zara Williams stood up slowly from seat 1A, and the entire cabin fell silent. The transformation was immediate and dramatic. She was no longer a passenger enduring discrimination, but a federal authority taking command of a crime scene. Ladies and gentlemen, she announced, her voice carrying clearly throughout the aircraft. This is Dr. Zara Williams, Senior Field Auditor with the Federal Aviation Administration. This aircraft is now under federal investigation for civil rights violations, safety protocol breaches, and corporate policy failures. The words hit the cabin like a physical shockwave. Amanda's live stream viewer count exploded past 35,000 as people shared the moment across every social platform. The chat was moving so fast with comments like, "Federal authority justice served Apex is done," that she couldn't read individual messages. Agent Martinez stepped forward with his credentials displayed. By authority of the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Department of Transportation, all passengers and crew are required to remain in their current positions while we collect evidence. Harrison Blackwood looked like he had aged 20 years in 20 minutes. The handcuffs clicked into place around his wrists as he finally understood the magnitude of what had happened. "This is impossible," he whispered. "Federal auditors don't work this way. They don't fly undercover in regular clothes." "Mr. Blackwood, Zara," replied, "federal auditors work exactly this way when we're investigating reports of widespread discrimination. The only way to document true airline behavior is to experience it as a regular passenger." She held up her encrypted tablet, its screen displaying multiple federal database connections. "Every word spoken on this aircraft has been recorded and uploaded to secure federal servers. Every action taken by crew members has been documented with legal timestamp verification." Captain Morrison appeared to be in shock. "Ma'am, Dr. Williams, if we had known you were federal authority—" "Captain Morrison, that's exactly the point. You should treat every passenger with dignity and respect, not just the ones you think might have power to hurt you." Zara's voice carried the quiet authority of someone accustomed to commanding compliance. Federal law doesn't make exceptions for ignorance. Cassandra Blake had retreated as far back in the galley as possible, but there was nowhere to hide from the federal investigation unfolding around her. "Dr. Williams, please understand we were following company protocols for premium passenger management. Miss Blake, you followed illegal protocols that violate federal civil rights law. The fact that your company trained you to discriminate doesn't eliminate your personal liability." Robert Fisher stood at attention in his seat. "Dr. Williams, as a retired Air Force colonel, I want to thank you for your service. What happened here tonight needed to be exposed." "Thank you, Colonel Fisher. Your military training helped you recognize violations that civilian passengers might not understand." Maria Santos was typing furiously on her phone. "Dr. Williams, as a corporate compliance officer, I've documented everything for my professional network. This incident is going to change industry standards across the entire travel sector." The FBI agents were methodically photographing the cabin, collecting witness statements and downloading data from the aircraft's internal systems. Everything was being preserved as federal evidence. Amanda's live stream had become the primary source of information for major news outlets. Viewers were now approaching 40,000 people watching live. This story is breaking on CNN, MSNBC, and every major news platform. We're witnessing history. Harrison was staring at the floor, finally comprehending that his public discrimination against a federal auditor would become a case study in civil rights law. "I want my attorney," he repeated weakly. "Mr. Blackwood, your attorney will be contacted once you're processed at Federal Detention," Agent Martinez replied. "You're facing charges of civil rights violations, interference with a federal investigation, and assault on a federal officer." Jennifer Walsh was still live streaming to her own audience. "This is the most incredible thing I've ever witnessed. Justice actually happening in real time. People need to see that discrimination has real consequences." Zara opened a secure communication channel on her device. "FAA command. This is Agent Williams, badge 2847. I'm reporting a Code Alpha incident on Apex Airlines Flight 892. Request immediate federal response team." The response was immediate. "Agent Williams' federal response team is airborne. Estimated arrival 12 minutes. Maintain scene security until relieved." "Understood. Scene is secure with FBI assistance." Miguel Rodriguez approached from the gate. "Dr. Williams, I'm the gate agent who processed your boarding. I want to apologize for any role I played in this incident. Mr. Rodriguez, you performed your duties professionally. You're not under investigation. In fact, your conduct tonight will be noted positively in my federal report." The relief on Miguel's face was visible. He had been terrified that his career was over. Linda Park, the operations supervisor, was pale and clearly panicking. "Dr. Williams, as Apex Airlines Operations Management, we want to cooperate fully with your investigation." "What do you need from us?" "Ms. Park, you need to ground Flight 892 indefinitely. This aircraft is federal evidence. You also need to preserve all crew training materials, corporate policy documents, and passenger service protocols for federal review. Immediately." "Yes, ma'am." Zara's device chimed with an incoming priority message from Washington Congress. Briefed Transportation Committee scheduling emergency hearings. Apex. Airlines. Stock trading. Halted media response coordinated. The story had reached the highest levels of federal government within an hour of the incident beginning. "Dr. Williams, Agent Martinez said we've been instructed to provide you with any support necessary to complete your investigation. This incident has been flagged at the cabinet level." Zara nodded. "The evidence speaks for itself. This isn't just about one flight or one airline. This is about corporate culture that enables discrimination because companies believe they won't face real consequences." She looked directly at Amanda's camera. "Tonight, everyone watching this stream has seen what accountability looks like when federal oversight actually has teeth. This is what happens when discrimination meets federal authority." The climax was complete. Federal authority had been revealed, arrests were being made, and a corporation was about to face the full weight of federal justice. But the consequences were just beginning. Dr. Zara Williams walked to the front of the first-class cabin with the confident bearing of someone who had just transformed from victim to prosecutor. The federal investigation she commanded now had the attention of Congress, the Department of Justice, and newsrooms across the country. "Agent Martinez," she said to the FBI special agent, "I need to establish formal federal jurisdiction over this incident. Can you confirm that your agency is prepared to support a comprehensive civil rights investigation?" "Absolutely, Dr. Williams. We've been monitoring your undercover audit program for months. When your incident alert hit federal databases, it triggered automatic FBI response protocols." Amanda's live stream had reached 47,000 viewers, making it one of the most watched real-time civil rights incidents in social media history. News helicopters were already circling O'Hare Airport, and camera crews were setting up outside the terminal. Viewers, Amanda narrated breathlessly, "Federal agents are treating this aircraft like a crime scene. This isn't just a discrimination incident anymore. This is a federal case that could shut down an entire airline." Harrison Blackwood sat in handcuffs, no longer the commanding CEO who had boarded an hour earlier. His company's stock price had already dropped 15% in after-hours trading as news of his arrest spread through financial networks. "Dr. Williams," he said desperately, "surely we can resolve this matter quietly. I have significant influence in Washington. Perhaps we could discuss a settlement that benefits everyone involved." "Mr. Blackwood, you just attempted to bribe a federal auditor in front of witnesses and recording devices. That's an additional felony charge." Agent Martinez made another note in his federal incident report. Corporate executives attempting to buy their way out of federal civil rights violations was a pattern the Justice Department was determined to break. Captain Morrison approached cautiously. "Dr. Williams, what's the status of my crew? Are we all under arrest?" "Captain, that depends on your level of cooperation with the federal investigation. You violated multiple FAA safety protocols by attempting to remove a passenger based on discriminatory complaints. However, if you provide full testimony about corporate policies that led to tonight's violations, the Justice Department might consider reduced charges. The offer of cooperation was strategic federal prosecutors needed insider testimony to build cases against corporate executives who enabled discrimination through official company policies. Cassandra Blake was crying in the galley, finally understanding that her career in aviation was over. Dr. Williams, I was just following training protocols. Apex taught us to prioritize elite passenger comfort above everything else. Ms. Blake, federal law prioritizes passenger rights above corporate profits. Your company's training violated federal civil rights statutes, and you're personally liable for implementing discriminatory policies. Maria Santos was documenting the legal proceedings for her professional network. This is unprecedented accountability, she posted on LinkedIn. Federal agents are treating airline discrimination as seriously as any other civil rights violation. Robert Fisher stood and saluted as federal agents passed his row. Dr. Williams, 30 years of military service taught me to respect federal authority. You've conducted yourself with exceptional professionalism under extremely challenging circumstances. Thank you, Colonel. Your witness testimony will be crucial for federal prosecutors. Jennifer Walsh was still live streaming despite her flight anxiety. People watching this need to understand this is what justice looks like when the system actually works. Federal agents don't mess around with civil rights violations. Zara opened her secure communication device and initiated a priority call to FAA headquarters in Washington. The call was answered immediately by the Director of Civil Rights Enforcement. Agent Williams, we're monitoring your situation in real time. Congress has been briefed, and the Transportation Secretary is coordinating with Justice Department leadership. What's your assessment of Apex Airlines' corporate liability? Sir, the evidence indicates comprehensive corporate policy that prioritizes elite passenger comfort over federal civil rights law. This isn't isolated employee misconduct. This is institutional discrimination enabled by executive leadership. Understood. Federal prosecutors are preparing charges against corporate executives. We need your complete evidentiary file within 6 hours. Already uploaded and continuously updating, sir. The call ended and Zara turned to address the entire cabin. Ladies and gentlemen, what you've witnessed tonight represents the largest federal civil rights enforcement action against a commercial airline in over 20 years. Amanda's chat was exploding with legal commentary from viewers. Corporate executives going down, federal civil rights case, Apex stock crashing. Miguel Rodriguez approached with obvious relief. Dr. Williams' gate operations wants to confirm, are we preserving this aircraft as federal evidence? Yes. Mr. Rodriguez. Flight 892 will remain grounded pending complete federal investigation. All passengers will be accommodated on alternative flights, and the federal government will cover any additional costs. Harrison's phone was buzzing constantly with calls from his board of directors, but Agent Martinez had confiscated it as evidence. The corporate empire he'd spent decades building was crumbling in real time. This is insane, Harrison muttered. One flight attendant being overly cautious about passenger verification doesn't justify destroying an entire company. Mr. Blackwood Zara replied, You publicly accused a federal auditor of theft and fraud based solely on racial prejudice. You demanded that airline staff violate federal passenger protection laws. And you've spent the last hour attempting to bribe federal agents. This isn't about one flight attendant. This is about you personally committing multiple federal crimes. Agent Martinez closed his notebook. Dr. Williams, we're ready to transport the suspect to federal detention. Do you need anything else from him for your investigation? Just ensure he understands that his statements tonight have been recorded as evidence for federal civil rights prosecutors. As Harrison was escorted off the aircraft in handcuffs, Amanda's live stream captured every moment. The image of a billionaire CEO being arrested for airline discrimination would become one of the most shared photographs in civil rights history. The full power of federal authority had been revealed, but the consequences for Apex Airlines were just beginning. Dr. Zara Williams connected her encrypted tablet to the aircraft's display system, projecting her federal investigation findings onto screens visible throughout the cabin. For the first time, passengers could see the comprehensive evidence that had been building for months. Ladies and gentlemen, what happened tonight was not an isolated incident. It was part of a documented pattern of discrimination that Apex Airlines has been perpetrating for over 2 years. The display showed a timeline of federal complaints, 47 incidents in 6 months, all involving minority passengers being questioned, relocated, or removed from premium seating. Every complaint had been buried by corporate management. Amanda's live stream audience had grown to over 50,000 viewers as major news outlets linked to her feed. Viewers were seeing federal evidence that this airline has been discriminating against passengers for years. Agent Martinez was photographing every screen display as part of the federal evidence collection. Dr. Williams. This level of documentation is extraordinary. Federal prosecutors rarely have this much real-time evidence for civil rights cases. The evidence showed that Apex Airlines' Diamond Elite protocol explicitly instructed crew members to prioritize wealthy passenger comfort over federal passenger protection laws. Training materials actually included language about managing passenger expectations based on appropriate presentation standards. Ms. Blake Zara addressed the flight attendant directly. Your training materials instructed you to evaluate passengers based on appearance and perceived economic status. That training violates federal civil rights law. Cassandra was staring at the evidence display in shock. We were told those policies came from legal department. Management said they were approved by federal regulators. Federal regulators never approved discrimination policies, Ms. Blake. Your corporate leadership lied to avoid liability for illegal practices. Robert Fisher was studying the evidence with military precision, Dr. Williams. This documentation shows deliberate corporate strategy to violate federal law while maintaining plausible deniability. This is criminal conspiracy. Exactly. Colonel. Federal prosecutors will pursue charges against executive leadership for implementing policies they knew violated federal civil rights statutes. Maria Santos was sharing screenshots of the evidence with her corporate compliance network. This is what institutional discrimination looks like, she posted on multiple platforms. Corporate policies that explicitly enable illegal behavior. The display showed internal corporate emails discussing problem passengers and strategies for relocating them without triggering formal complaints. Executive leadership had been aware of federal violations, but chose to continue discriminatory practices because they generated higher profits from elite passengers. Jennifer Walsh was documenting everything for her social media followers. People watching this need to understand this company knew they were breaking federal law. They just didn't care because they thought they wouldn't get caught. Zara highlighted a particularly damaging internal memo from Apex Airlines CEO to regional managers. Premium passenger satisfaction is our top priority. Crew members should use appropriate discretion when managing passenger expectations based on presentation standards. This memo, Zara explained, instructs employees to discriminate while using coded language to avoid legal liability. Federal prosecutors call this willful discrimination with intent to evade federal oversight. Agent Martinez was recording every evidence display. Dr. Williams, have you quantified the scope of potential civil rights violations? Based on passenger manifests and complaint patterns, we estimate over 300 incidents of discriminatory treatment in the past 18 months. Most victims never filed formal complaints because they assumed nothing would be done. Amanda's chat was filled with comments from viewers sharing their own experiences. This happened to me on Apex. They questioned my boarding pass, too. Finally, someone holding them accountable. The evidence showed that Apex Airlines' discrimination wasn't limited to seating disputes. The company had patterns of questioning minority passengers' identification, requiring additional verification for credit card payments, and suggesting that passengers might be more comfortable in lower service classes. Mr. Rodriguez Zara addressed the gate agent. Your professional conduct tonight demonstrates that discrimination isn't inevitable. Federal law requires all airline employees to treat passengers equally regardless of appearance or perceived economic status. Miguel nodded gratefully. Dr. Williams, I've seen other gate agents follow those discriminatory protocols. I always wondered if they were legal. They're not legal, Mr. Rodriguez. Any airline employee who implements discriminatory policies can face personal federal charges regardless of corporate training or management pressure. The evidence display concluded with real-time financial data showing Apex Airlines' stock price in freefall. Institutional investors were dumping shares as news of federal civil rights violations spread through financial networks. This is what accountability looks like, Zara announced to the cabin and Amanda's global audience. When corporations violate federal civil rights law, they face criminal prosecution, financial penalties, and public exposure that destroys their business model. Captain Morrison was staring at the evidence in obvious distress. Dr. Williams, I had no idea corporate policies were illegal. Management told us these protocols were standard industry practices. Captain, Federal Aviation law requires pilots to prioritize passenger safety and rights over corporate profits. Your decision tonight to remove a passenger based on discriminatory complaints violated your federal certification requirements. The evidence presentation was complete. Months of federal investigation had been condensed into a devastating case study of corporate discrimination that would become required reading in civil rights law schools across the country. Federal prosecutors now had everything they needed to dismantle Apex Airlines' discriminatory corporate culture and hold executive leadership personally accountable for years of civil rights violations. Justice was no longer coming, it had arrived. The federal agents worked methodically through the cabin, documenting individual roles in the discrimination incident and explaining the personal consequences each person would face. Cassandra Blake was escorted to a private area of the aircraft where Agent Martinez began recording her formal statement. Her elegant appearance, the carefully styled hair, the designer uniform modifications, the polished presentation that had made her feel superior to certain passengers now looked like a costume she could no longer afford to maintain. Ms. Blake, you're facing federal charges for civil rights violations, filing false security reports, and conspiracy to deprive passengers of their constitutional rights, Agent Martinez explained. These are felony charges that carry potential prison sentences and will permanently end your career in commercial aviation. Cassandra's composure finally cracked completely. I was just doing my job. I was following company protocols that management told us were legal. Ms. Blake, federal law doesn't provide a defense for following illegal corporate policies. You had a personal responsibility to refuse to implement discriminatory practices regardless of management pressure. Her aviation career was over instantly. Within 24 hours, her name would be placed on the federal do not hire list that prevented discriminatory employees from finding work at any commercial airline in the United States. Dr. Zara Williams personally delivered the news that would transform Cassandra's life. Ms. Blake, your actions tonight will become a case study in civil rights law schools. Your name will be permanently associated with workplace discrimination. That's the cost of choosing prejudice over professionalism. Harrison Blackwood faced far more severe consequences. As federal agents processed his arrest, his corporate empire was collapsing in real time. His board of directors had called an emergency meeting and voted unanimously to remove him as CEO while he was still in handcuffs. Mr. Blackwood, Agent Martinez explained, you're facing federal hate crime charges, interference with federal investigation assault on a federal officer, and attempted bribery of federal agents. These charges carry potential sentences of 15 to 25 years in federal prison. But the criminal charges were only the beginning. The Department of Transportation was reviewing every government contract his company held, worth over $800 million annually. Federal agencies were legally required to terminate contracts with companies whose executives were convicted of civil rights violations. Harrison's personal wealth, built over decades of aggressive business practices, would be consumed by legal fees and federal penalties. The man who had boarded Flight 892 as a billionaire would emerge from federal court as a cautionary tale about the cost of public discrimination. Captain Morrison faced the loss of his pilot's license and potential criminal charges for violating federal aviation safety protocols. Captain Dr. Williams explained you prioritized a passenger's discriminatory demands over federal passenger protection laws. That's a violation of your federal certification that requires immediate license suspension. His 25-year aviation career ended with a single poor decision choosing elite passenger comfort over federal civil rights law. The airline industry would remember him as the pilot who destroyed his career to accommodate racism. But the consequences extended beyond individual punishment. Amanda Torres, the travel blogger whose live stream had documented everything, became an overnight symbol of citizen journalism fighting discrimination. Amanda Dr. Williams said your documentation tonight provided crucial evidence for federal prosecutors. You've shown that ordinary passengers can play a vital role in holding corporations accountable for civil rights violations. Amanda's follower count had exploded to over 100,000 as news outlets featured her live stream coverage. She would become a leading voice for passenger rights activism and social justice documentation. Robert Fisher, the retired Air Force colonel, found his witness testimony in demand by federal prosecutors building cases against corporate discrimination. His military credibility provided powerful support for civil rights enforcement. Colonel Fisher, your recognition of illegal conduct helped preserve evidence that might otherwise have been dismissed as misunderstanding. Federal prosecutors need witnesses with your integrity and experience. Maria Santos leveraged her corporate compliance expertise to become a consultant helping companies avoid discriminatory practices. Her real-time documentation of federal violations made her one of the most sought-after civil rights compliance experts in American business. Ms. Santos, your professional analysis of tonight's violations will help prevent similar incidents across multiple industries. You've demonstrated how employee awareness can stop discrimination before it becomes criminal conduct. Jennifer Walsh, despite her flight anxiety, became an advocate for mental health awareness in civil rights activism. Her live stream showed that even nervous, anxious individuals could stand up to injustice when it mattered. Jennifer, your courage tonight proves that ordinary people can make extraordinary differences when they document discrimination and support victims of prejudice. Miguel Rodriguez received formal recognition from the FAA for maintaining professional standards, despite corporate pressure to implement discriminatory policies. His conduct became a model for employee resistance to illegal management directives. Mr. Rodriguez, you proved that individual employees can maintain legal and ethical standards, even when corporate culture encourages discrimination. That's the foundation of civil rights protection. But perhaps the most significant consequence was the transformation of federal civil rights enforcement. Dr. Williams's undercover audit program became the model for proactive federal investigation of corporate discrimination. Tonight, she explained to Amanda's global audience, demonstrates that federal civil rights enforcement works when agents are willing to experience discrimination personally and document corporate violations comprehensively. The individual consequences were swift and permanent. Within weeks, everyone involved would see their lives fundamentally changed by the choices they made during 14 minutes on Flight 892. Cassandra Blake would never work in aviation again. Harrison Blackwood would face federal prison and financial ruin. Captain Morrison would lose his pilot's license and face criminal charges. But the witnesses who chose justice over silence, Amanda, Robert, Maria, and Jennifer, would become symbols of how ordinary people can create extraordinary accountability when they refuse to ignore discrimination. The personal costs of prejudice had never been clearer, and the power of individual courage to create change had never been more visible. Within 2 hours of Dr. Zara Williams revealing her federal authority, the consequences began cascading through corporate America and federal agencies with unprecedented speed and scope. The Department of Transportation issued an immediate emergency order grounding Apex Airlines' entire fleet, pending comprehensive civil rights investigation. Every aircraft, every route, every crew member would undergo federal review before the airline could resume operations. This action is unprecedented, Transportation Secretary Michael Chen announced in a hastily organized press conference. When federal auditors document institutional discrimination, we respond with maximum enforcement authority. Congressional offices were flooded with calls demanding hearings on airline discrimination. The House Transportation Committee scheduled emergency sessions, and committee chairs promised that Apex Airlines executives would face public testimony about their corporate policies. Senator Rebecca Martinez, chair of the Senate Civil Rights Subcommittee, announced federal legislation inspired directly by tonight's incident. The Passenger Dignity Act will mandate federal oversight officers on all commercial flights to prevent discrimination before it occurs. Amanda's live-stream footage became evidence in federal court proceedings, but it also sparked a social media revolution. Federal Auditor became the top trending hashtag globally as millions of people shared their own experiences with airline discrimination. Travel bloggers across the country began documenting airline behavior more aggressively. Flight attendants and gate agents reported being watched constantly by passengers who were no longer willing to ignore discriminatory treatment. The power dynamic has completely shifted, Maria Santos posted to her corporate compliance network. Airlines now assume every passenger might be a federal auditor or might be recording discrimination for viral exposure. Dr. Williams received calls from civil rights organizations, congressional offices, and international human rights groups requesting her expertise for similar undercover investigations. Her audit methodology would become the global standard for investigating corporate discrimination. But the most significant change was happening inside airline corporate offices across the country. Every major carrier immediately reviewed their customer service policies, terrified that they might be harboring discriminatory practices that could trigger federal investigations. United Airlines announced mandatory civil rights training for all employees within 60 days. Delta Airlines implemented new passenger protection protocols. Southwest Airlines hired federal compliance officers to monitor crew behavior in real time. The entire industry is scrambling to avoid becoming the next Apex Airlines, Robert Fisher told his daughter's civil rights law firm. One viral federal investigation has created more airline policy reform than decades of passenger complaints. Federal prosecutors in Washington were coordinating the largest civil rights case against a transportation company in modern history. The evidence from Flight 892 had opened investigations into airline practices nationwide. Harrison Blackwood's arrest sparked investigations into his company's government contracts, revealing additional patterns of discriminatory business practices that would destroy his corporate empire completely. Jennifer Walsh's live stream coverage inspired legislation in 12 states requiring airlines to post passenger rights information prominently in all boarding areas. Her nervous energy had become a powerful force for civil rights education. The Federal Aviation Administration announced the creation of a new Civil Rights Enforcement Division with Dr. Williams as its founding director. Undercover federal auditors would now monitor airline behavior, continuously making discrimination detection inevitable rather than accidental. "We're not waiting for discrimination reports anymore," Dr. Williams announced at a federal press conference. Federal agents will be experiencing airline service personally and documenting violations in real time. Major corporations across all industries began reviewing their customer service policies, recognizing that federal undercover investigations could expose discriminatory practices in any business sector. Wall Street analysts downgraded airline stocks sector-wide as investors realized that discriminatory practices created massive federal liability that could bankrupt companies overnight. The Apex incident proves that civil rights violations carry existential business risk, Goldman Sachs analysts reported. Companies can no longer afford to tolerate discriminatory employee behavior. International civil rights organizations requested Dr. Williams' assistance investigating transportation discrimination in European and Asian airlines. Her audit methodology would become a global tool for fighting institutional prejudice. The transformation was comprehensive and permanent. A single federal auditor's decision to document airline discrimination had triggered policy changes affecting millions of travelers worldwide. But perhaps the most important change was in individual passenger behavior. People were no longer willing to ignore discrimination when they witnessed it. They were recording incidents, sharing experiences, and holding airlines accountable through social media activism. Tonight changed everything, Amanda told her, massively expanded social media following. Passengers now know that discrimination has real consequences and that ordinary people have the power to create extraordinary justice. The transformation was just beginning, but its direction was clear. Corporate discrimination would no longer be tolerated, hidden, or excused. Federal authority would ensure accountability, and citizen activism would maintain vigilance. Dr. Zara Williams had accomplished more than documenting airline discrimination. She had proven that federal civil rights enforcement could create rapid, comprehensive, lasting change when agencies were willing to investigate boldly and prosecute aggressively. The age of consequence-free discrimination was ending, and it had ended in Seat 1A of Flight 892. 48 hours after the Flight 892 incident, the emergency boardroom at Apex Airlines headquarters looked like a war zone. The mahogany conference table that had once symbolized corporate power was now covered with federal subpoenas, legal documents, and resignation letters from executives fleeing the company before criminal charges could be filed. Dr. Zara Williams entered the room wearing her official federal uniform, a sharp navy suit with her FAA credentials prominently displayed. She was no longer undercover. She was federal authority personified, backed by the full weight of the Department of Justice and flanked by federal prosecutors who would determine whether Apex Airlines survived the next 6 months. Across from her sat the remnants of Apex Airlines leadership interim CEO Patricia Mason, who had been elevated from chief financial officer when the board fired Harrison Blackwood via emergency vote. General counsel Rebecca Torres, whose legal team was scrambling to avoid criminal conspiracy charges, and operations director Michael Foster, who was cooperating with federal investigators in hopes of avoiding prison. The atmosphere was one of complete corporate capitulation. Dr. Williams' Patricia Mason began, her voice barely steady, on behalf of Apex Airlines. I want to offer our complete cooperation with your federal investigation. We're committed to implementing any changes necessary to prevent future incidents. Ms. Mason, this isn't about preventing future incidents. This is about accountability for years of deliberate civil rights violations that your company implemented as corporate policy. Federal prosecutor David Chin opened a file containing evidence that would destroy any remaining corporate defenses. Apex Airlines, you're facing criminal charges as a corporate entity, civil penalties exceeding $200 million, and the potential revocation of your federal operating certificates. The financial penalties alone would bankrupt most airlines. But the criminal charges against the corporation could trigger asset forfeiture and permanent shutdown. Dr. Williams placed a document on the conference table. These are the terms for federal settlement. They are non-negotiable. The terms were devastating but comprehensive. Financial accountability: Apex Airlines would pay $85 million in civil penalties to the federal government, plus $45 million in passenger compensation to victims of discrimination over the past 5 years. Every passenger who had experienced discriminatory treatment would receive substantial monetary damages. Corporate restructuring. The entire executive leadership would be replaced with federally approved management committed to civil rights compliance. Board members who had enabled discriminatory policies would face personal legal liability. Operational oversight. Federal compliance officers would be permanently stationed at every Apex Airlines facility with real-time authority to shut down operations for civil rights violations. Employee accountability. Every employee would undergo comprehensive civil rights training, and discriminatory behavior would result in immediate termination and federal prosecution. Policy transformation. All customer service protocols would be rewritten under federal supervision to eliminate any possibility of discriminatory treatment. Rebecca Torres, the general counsel, tried to negotiate. Dr. Williams, these terms would fundamentally alter our business operations. Perhaps we could discuss modified penalties that... Mrs. Torres, your company spent years violating federal civil rights law. These terms represent the minimum accountability necessary to prevent continued violations. Federal Prosecutor Chen was uncompromising. Apex Airlines can accept these terms, or we will proceed with criminal prosecution that will result in permanent shutdown and executive imprisonment. The choice was corporate transformation or corporate death. Patricia Mason looked around the room at the remaining executives, all of whom were calculating their personal legal exposure. What guarantees do we have that compliance with these terms will prevent further federal action? Full compliance will prevent further civil penalties, Dr. Williams replied. However, individual executives who enabled discriminatory policies will still face personal criminal prosecution. The message was clear. Corporate accountability wouldn't shield individuals who had personally implemented illegal practices. Michael Foster, who had been quietly cooperating with federal investigators, spoke up. Dr. Williams, our internal audit revealed that discriminatory policies were implemented deliberately by executive leadership. Lower-level employees were following illegal orders without understanding their legal liability. Mr. Foster, that information will help federal prosecutors distinguish between executives who created illegal policies and employees who were misled about their legal requirements. The settlement terms included provisions for employee protection workers who had implemented discriminatory policies under management pressure would receive federal immunity in exchange for testimony against corporate executives. Dr. Williams opened her federal device and displayed real-time data about Apex Airlines' financial status. Your stock price has dropped 67% since Flight 892. Major investors are demanding immediate resolution to prevent total collapse. The market had already delivered its verdict. Companies that violated civil rights faced existential business risk. Furthermore, Prosecutor Chen added, your federal operating certificates are suspended pending compliance verification. You cannot resume passenger service until federal auditors confirm that discriminatory practices have been completely eliminated. Apex Airlines was effectively grounded until they proved they could operate legally. Patricia Mason realized that negotiation was impossible. We accept the federal settlement terms. But Dr. Williams wasn't finished. Acceptance isn't enough. I need personal guarantees from each executive that you will implement comprehensive civil rights compliance regardless of financial cost. She was requiring personal accountability from corporate leaders who had spent years hiding behind corporate liability shields. Any executive who fails to implement required changes will face individual federal prosecution for civil rights violations. This accountability extends personally to each of you. The transformation was complete but permanent. Apex Airlines would survive, but it would operate under federal oversight that made discrimination impossible rather than merely illegal. Rebecca Torres signed the settlement documents with shaking hands. Michael Foster provided written testimony about executive misconduct that would send former leaders to federal prison. Patricia Mason accepted personal liability for ensuring that her company never again violated passenger civil rights. Dr. Williams collected the signed documents and prepared to leave. Ladies and gentlemen, federal civil rights enforcement has changed permanently. Undercover federal auditors will monitor airline behavior continuously. Discrimination will be detected, documented, and prosecuted aggressively. As she walked out of the boardroom, she left behind a company that would become a model for federal civil rights compliance. Not because they chose transformation, but because federal authority had made discrimination impossible to sustain. The resolution was complete. Justice had arrived with federal authority and permanent consequences. 6 months after Flight 89, Dr. Zara Williams stood before a joint congressional hearing wearing the same calm confidence that had carried her through the most viral civil rights incident in modern aviation history. But today, she wasn't documenting discrimination. She was explaining how federal enforcement could create lasting change. Senators, the Flight 892 incident proved that undercover federal auditing creates accountability that traditional complaint systems cannot achieve, she testified. When corporations know that any passenger might be a federal auditor, discrimination becomes impossible to sustain as business practice. Senator Rebecca Martinez, chair of the Civil Rights Subcommittee, was taking notes for federal legislation that would expand undercover audit programs across all transportation sectors. Dr. Williams, how many similar investigations has your program conducted since Flight 892? We've completed 47 undercover audits across 12 airlines. We've documented discrimination in 68% of cases, resulting in federal prosecution of 31 corporate executives and civil rights training for over 50,000 airline employees. The success statistics were overwhelming. Federal undercover auditing had become the most effective civil rights enforcement tool in decades. Amanda Torres had leveraged her viral documentation into a career as a civil rights journalist with over 2.3 million social media followers and a book deal for her account of Flight 892. Dr. Williams changed how ordinary people think about accountability, she told congressional investigators. Now passengers know they have the power to document discrimination and create real consequences. Her live stream footage from Flight 892 had become required viewing in civil rights law courses and corporate compliance training programs. The video demonstrated both the persistence of airline discrimination and the power of citizen documentation to expose it. Robert Fisher had testified at 14 federal hearings about airline discrimination using his military credibility to support civil rights enforcement. Dr. Williams proved that federal authority must experience discrimination personally to understand its impact and document its scope. His witness testimony had helped convict 5 airline executives of federal civil rights violations, sending a clear message that discrimination carried criminal consequences regardless of corporate position. Maria Santos had transformed her corporate compliance expertise into a consulting business, helping companies avoid discriminatory practices. Her client list included every major airline and dozens of corporations terrified of becoming the next Apex Airlines. The Flight 892 incident changed corporate risk assessment completely, she explained to business leaders. Companies now understand that discriminatory practices create federal criminal liability that can destroy businesses overnight. Jennifer Walsh had overcome her flight anxiety to become an advocate for disability rights in transportation, showing that even nervous, anxious individuals could create powerful change when they documented injustice. Miguel Rodriguez had been promoted to regional management and was implementing passenger protection protocols across multiple airports, proving that individual employees could resist discriminatory corporate pressure. But the most significant transformation was in Dr. Williams herself. She had been promoted to director of the Federal Civil Rights Enforcement Division with authority to conduct undercover investigations across all transportation sectors. The Flight 892 model is being expanded to trains, buses, cruise ships, and ride-sharing services, she announced at a federal press conference. Federal auditors will experience discrimination personally and document violations comprehensively. Her sister, Keisha, the medical resident whose humiliation had inspired Zara's civil rights career, joined her at the press conference. My sister transformed personal pain into federal policy that protects millions of travelers. That's the power of turning injustice into action. The Passenger Dignity Act had passed Congress unanimously mandating federal oversight officers on high-volume transportation routes and requiring real-time civil rights monitoring of customer service interactions. Harrison Blackwood was serving a 15-year federal sentence for civil rights violations, attempted bribery, and conspiracy charges. His corporate empire had been liquidated to pay victim compensation, and his name had become synonymous with the personal cost of public discrimination. Cassandra Blake was working as a receptionist in Ohio, permanently banned from aviation employment and facing years of probation for her federal convictions. Her elegant appearance could no longer mask the reality that discriminatory behavior carried life-changing consequences. Captain Morrison had lost his pilot's license and was facing federal charges for violating passenger protection protocols. The airline industry remembered him as the pilot who chose elite passenger comfort over federal civil rights law. Apex Airlines had survived but was unrecognizable from the company that had operated Flight 892. Under federal oversight, it had become a model for civil rights compliance with federal auditors permanently stationed at every facility. Dr. Williams returned to her downtown Chicago apartment on the 6-month anniversary of Flight 892, wearing the same hoodie and leggings she had worn on that stormy evening. But now, every airline employee in the country knew that casual clothing might disguise federal authority with the power to shut down entire companies. She opened her secure federal device and began planning the next undercover audit, this time targeting bus companies that had received discrimination complaints. The methodology that had transformed airline accountability would now spread to every form of public transportation. Personal justice, she reflected, isn't about revenge against individual discriminators. It's about creating accountability that makes discrimination impossible for future victims. Her transformation from victim to federal enforcer had protected millions of travelers who would never experience the humiliation that had motivated her career. The personal justice was complete, but the mission was expanding. Federal civil rights enforcement would continue growing stronger because one woman had chosen to document discrimination rather than endure it silently. Dr. Zara Williams had proven that individual courage combined with federal authority could create change more powerful than any single incident of injustice. The rain was falling against the windows of O'Hare Terminal 3, exactly as it had 6 months earlier, but everything else had changed. Dr. Zara Williams walked through the concourse, wearing the same oversized gray hoodie and black leggings that had triggered the most significant civil rights enforcement action in modern aviation history. But now her casual appearance carried a different meaning. Every airline employee in the country knew that federal auditors could be anyone, anywhere at any time. At Gate B7, the same gate where Flight 892 had been scheduled to depart the atmosphere was completely transformed. Passengers of all backgrounds were being treated with uniform respect by airline staff who understood that discrimination could end their careers and trigger federal prosecution. Miguel Rodriguez, now promoted to senior gate agent supervisor, recognized Dr. Williams immediately. "Dr. Williams, it's an honor to see you again. Your work has changed everything about how we serve passengers." "Thank you, Miguel." Your professionalism that night helped demonstrate that individual employees can maintain ethical standards even when corporate culture encourages discrimination. She approached the gate for Apex Airlines Flight 447 bound for Washington, D.C., the same route as 6 months earlier, but now operated by an airline that had become a model for federal civil rights compliance. The gate agent scanned her boarding pass and immediately smiled. "Dr. Williams, welcome back. We have your preferred sparkling water waiting, and the captain asked me to let you know that he's honored to have you aboard." The transformation was complete. Instead of being questioned about her right to fly first class, Dr. Williams was receiving VIP treatment based on her federal service rather than her appearance. As she walked down the jet bridge, she passed Amanda Torres, who was boarding the same flight for a civil rights journalism conference in Washington. Amanda had leveraged her viral live stream into a career documenting discrimination across multiple industries. "Dr. Williams, I'm so glad to see you. Are you traveling on official business or personal time?" "A little of both, Amanda. How's your investigation into hotel discrimination practices?" "Making progress. Your undercover audit methodology is working perfectly for documenting bias in hospitality services." The aircraft cabin looked identical to 6 months earlier, but the atmosphere was completely different. Flight attendants moved with respectful professionalism, treating every passenger with the dignity that federal law required. The lead flight attendant, Jessica Martinez, greeted Dr. Williams with genuine warmth. "Dr. Williams, it's an absolute privilege to serve you today. All of us in this crew have completed the federal civil rights training program your division developed. How did you find the training, Jessica, life-changing? We learned that our job isn't just passenger safety, it's passenger dignity. Every person who boards this aircraft deserves respect regardless of their appearance, background, or perceived status." Dr. Williams settled into seat 1A, the same seat where she had documented discrimination that changed an industry. Now it was reserved for her as recognition of her federal service, but she could have chosen any seat on any airline and received identical treatment. Robert Fisher was seated in 3A, traveling to Washington for another congressional hearing on transportation discrimination. Dr. Williams 6 months later. "And I'm still amazed by the transformation you've created. Airlines across the country have revolutionized their training because of what happened on Flight 892. The transformation was always possible, Robert. Federal law already prohibited discrimination. We just needed enforcement that made violations impossible to ignore." Maria Santos was in 4B, returning from a consulting assignment helping cruise lines implement civil rights compliance programs. "Dr. Williams, your audit methodology is being adopted across the entire hospitality industry. Companies are terrified of becoming the next Apex Airlines." Jennifer Walsh was in 5A, traveling to a disability rights conference where she would speak about overcoming anxiety to document injustice. "Dr. Williams, you taught me that ordinary people can create extraordinary change when they refuse to ignore discrimination. But the most meaningful change was in the airline's operational culture. Captain Rachel Thompson, the new pilot assigned to Flight 447, made an announcement that would have been unthinkable 6 months earlier. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard Flight 447. As your captain, I want you to know that this aircraft operates under federal civil rights oversight. Every passenger will be treated with equal dignity and respect. Any concerns about discriminatory service should be reported immediately to our federal compliance officer." Federal compliance officers were now permanently stationed on high-volume routes, ensuring that discrimination couldn't occur without immediate federal intervention. Dr. Williams opened her tablet, the same encrypted federal device that had documented evidence leading to criminal convictions and corporate transformation. But tonight, instead of documenting violations, she was reviewing success statistics from her expanded enforcement program. Federal Civil Rights Enforcement Division, 6-month report. Undercover audits completed. 127 companies investigated. 43 corporate executives prosecuted. 67 employee training programs implemented. 156 discrimination incidents reported, down 78% industry-wide. The statistics proved that aggressive federal enforcement had created lasting change across the entire transportation sector. As Flight 447 pushed back from the gate doctor, Williams reflected on the journey from that stormy evening when she had been questioned about belonging in first class to tonight when her federal service was recognized and celebrated. Her phone buzzed with a text from her sister, Keisha. "Watching the news coverage of your congressional testimony, you've transformed the humiliation I experienced into protection for millions of travelers. I'm so proud of the justice you've created. The personal motivation that had driven her civil rights career protecting other people from experiencing the discrimination her sister had endured had succeeded beyond her wildest expectations." Flight 447 lifted off into the evening sky, carrying passengers who would never experience the discrimination that had once been routine on commercial airlines. Federal oversight had made dignity a standard rather than a privilege. Dr. Williams closed her eyes and reflected on the power of individual courage to create change. A single decision to document discrimination rather than endure it silently had transformed an entire industry and protected millions of future travelers. "This is your captain speaking," Captain Thompson announced as they reached cruising altitude. Flight time to Washington will be approximately 2 hours. Dr. Williams, on behalf of the entire crew and Apex Airlines, thank you for your service in making aviation safer and more just for everyone. The announcement brought applause from passengers who understood that they were flying in an industry transformed by one woman's refusal to accept discrimination as inevitable. Dr. Zara Williams had completed her journey from victim to federal enforcer, from documenting one incident of discrimination to creating permanent protections for millions of travelers. The world had been changed permanently, and it had started in Seat 1A. What happened to the key players? Cassandra Blake never worked in aviation again. Her name became permanently associated with workplace discrimination, and she spent years dealing with the personal cost of her choices. She eventually found work in a small office where her past couldn't follow her. But the lesson was clear. Discrimination has consequences that last long after the moment. Harrison Blackwood lost everything. His federal hate crime conviction destroyed his business empire, his fortune disappeared into legal fees and victim compensation, and he became a symbol of how quickly power can turn to powerlessness when justice finally arrives. He serves as a reminder that no one is too wealthy or influential to escape accountability for civil rights violations. Dr. Zara Williams transformed American transportation forever. Her undercover audit program became the global standard for investigating corporate discrimination, and her methodology is now used by civil rights organizations worldwide. She proved that sometimes the most powerful response to injustice is patience, documentation, and strategic revelation of authority. My personal reflection. As someone who shares stories of justice and accountability, this one hits differently because it shows the power of individual courage meeting federal authority. Dr. Williams didn't need to raise her voice, cause drama, or create conflict. She simply documented the truth and let the system work. What makes this story extraordinary isn't just the dramatic revelation or the viral justice. It's that one woman's decision to experience discrimination rather than avoid it led to protections for millions of travelers. She turned personal pain into public policy. The beauty of Dr. Williams' approach was strategic patience. She could have revealed her authority immediately and stopped the discrimination. Instead, she allowed it to continue long enough to document comprehensive evidence that would prevent future victims from experiencing what she endured. The lesson everyone needs to understand. Discrimination thrives in silence and dies in documentation. When people record injustice, share evidence, and refuse to look away, they create accountability that changes everything permanently. Dr. Williams proved that the most effective response to bias isn't anger, it's evidence. Her story reminds us that authority doesn't always announce itself, and the person you're dismissing might be the one with power to change everything. But more importantly, treat people with dignity not because of who they might be, but because it's fundamentally right. My final advice. If you witness discrimination, document it. If you experience it, report it. And remember that federal auditors like Dr. Williams are still out there flying in casual clothes, taking careful notes, and building cases that protect your rights. The system works when people are brave enough to use it. Next time you're traveling, remember Seat 1A. Remember that justice doesn't always wear a uniform, carry a badge, or announce itself with authority. Sometimes it wears a hoodie, takes notes quietly, and changes the world one documented violation at a time. Never underestimate the power of patience, documentation, and strategic revelation of truth. That's how you create change that lasts. If this story inspired you to stand up for what's right, if it showed you the power of documentation and citizen journalism, if it reminded you that ordinary people can create extraordinary change when they refuse to ignore injustice, then do me a huge favor. Smash that like button right now. It really helps the channel grow and reach more people who need to hear these stories. Hit subscribe and ring that notification bell so you never miss another story of justice and accountability. Because when we share these stories, we're not just entertaining, we're educating people about their rights and inspiring them to stand up when it matters. Share this video with someone who needs to see that discrimination has real consequences, that federal oversight is real, and that individual courage can change entire industries. Comment below and tell me what you thought of Dr. Williams's strategic approach. Would you have the patience to document discrimination the way she did? Have you ever witnessed injustice that needed federal intervention? Your engagement helps these stories reach millions of people worldwide, and every share could inspire someone to document discrimination instead of ignoring it. Every like could encourage someone to report injustice instead of staying silent. Thank you for watching. Thank you for caring about justice, and remember, the next time someone tries to tell you that you don't belong somewhere, think about Dr. Zara Williams in Seat 1A. Sometimes the person they're underestimating is exactly the person who's going to hold them accountable. Until next time, keep fighting for what's right. Keep documenting the truth, and never forget that justice doesn't always announce itself, but it always arrives when people are brave enough to demand it.